Well, hello everyone. I know it's a few minutes after 11. I imagine people are still going to be joining in the next few minutes, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we can just go ahead and get started. I'm Rachel Jordan. I'm the policy analyst at DHCD in the Community Development Division, working with Matt Weaver in the Policy and Strategic Development Office. Thank you for joining the 2021 Cdbg How to Apply workshop, also my Fireside Chat. Doug Jackson is also on here. He's kind of the MC in charge. So he will be helping me monitor the chat box, which you guys are welcome to utilize as I work through the PowerPoint. If you have any questions, just throw them in the chat box, and we will pause periodically throughout just to try and answer some of those questions. If we don't have the answer today, we will definitely work on putting together a Q&A fact sheet, which we will publish on the website after this workshop. I know we had about 130 people registered already, and there are 81 people on this call. So yeah, a few more people might be joining during the presentation, but would like to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I don't imagine this taking a full 2 hours. I know everybody's super busy, but yeah, thank you again. So the good news is that if you're familiar with our current Cdbg program or have managed Cdbg projects in the past, overall our program design hasn't changed too much. We have incorporated some new changes for our 2021 programs and sub-programs that I think will benefit everyone, pretty much everyone on this call. So we'll get to those later. So just a program overview. The state Cdbg program was funded out of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. Every Cdbg project must meet one of 3 national objectives, one being benefit to low and moderate income individuals, slum and blight elimination, and urgent community development needs, with the LMI benefit being the most common Cdbg national objective. The state Cdbg program serves only non-entitlement localities, which if you need a list of those non-entitlement localities, they are on our website and in our current program design, and will be in the 2021 program design. And only localities or regional governments are eligible applicants. Not to say that nonprofits can't lead on some projects, but localities must be the ones to submit the actual applications in CAMS. So our program design, the 2020 program design is still on our website, and we have just finalized our 2021 program design, which I'll go over those significant changes to our program here on this presentation, but just wanted to let you know that the 2021 program design will be on our website in the next couple of days, as well as all of our 2021 program and sub-program fact sheets and the competitive application guidelines. So keep your eye out on that. There will probably be an e-blast announcing that those have been posted on the website. So one of the changes that we've made to our 2021 program is that we're beginning on a spring open date. So our open submission and planning grants, those applications will be opening in the next few days, hopefully by Friday, the end of this week, and will be due April 1st, and will be reviewed on a rolling basis as they're submitted, as we have funding available through December 31st, 2021. So that those applications will be open April 1st through the end of the year, as well as urgent need. Those will be reviewed on a rolling basis as well. Our competitive grant cycle for the first round of funding, those applications will be due April 1st. So the competitive grant applications also will be opening in the next few days and will be due on April 1st. In 2020, we had a second round, and so if we have funding available this year, we will have another second round. That deadline will be November 30th. At this point, I'll just pause to see if anybody has any questions or comments. Doug, is there anything in the chat box?
No, ma'am, nothing in the chat box yet.
Okay, great. We'll keep rolling. Okay, so this is our proposed 2021 funding distribution. Our HUD allocation is around 18 million. This might increase slightly, but as it sits today, we're going to have about 10 million available for competitive applications, 700,000 available for planning grants, and then the remaining 7 million will be distributed among the open submission subprograms. So this slide highlights all of the major changes that we've made to our 2021 program. Most significant, all of the pre-project planning grant activities will be rolled into a regular planning grant. So previously there were separate like pre-project planning grants, which would include community organizing, community needs assessments and analysis, economic needs assessments. All of those are going to be rolled into a full, what was previously known as a project planning grant. So there are no more like pre-planning grants. It's all going to be one planning grant. Different types of planning grants. For each subprogram, you can do a planning grant and still have those activities. We're just doing away with pre-project planning grants, rolling them into a full regular planning grant, and increasing planning grant caps, grant awards. Housing rehabilitation assistance will now be administered as 10-year forgivable loans. So after 10 years, that loan will be forgiven. That's kind of how we're operating now, but now it's just official. Planning grant applications will be due April 1st. Again, those will be reviewed on a rolling basis throughout the year. Competitive applications due April 1st, and then urgent need applications open April 1st until December 31st. If you're familiar with our previous years, we had 2 different sub-programs for economic development related projects, local innovation, and then the Community Economic Development Fund. We have combined those 2 sub-programs into one, the Economic Development and Entrepreneurship Fund. So this sub-program is going to be for any job creation, job retention, site readiness and development, innovative businesses, small-scale manufacturing. Any kind of economic development project will fall into this category. The previous community facility subprogram is now called public infrastructure. We just think that that makes more sense because those projects truly are public infrastructure. And we just wanted to align with HUD terminology for record keeping and data management. We just think that this made more sense. The actual program didn't change, just the program name. In 2020, we also took on public services as an eligible Cdbg activity. And now we are planning to continue funding public service activities, and it falls into our competitive grant program. So this slide is just kind of some note cards of our 3 main pots: the competitive, open submission, and planning grants, with our sub-programs listed under each and the estimated amount of funding available for each bucket. So this slide will be helpful for all of you to just keep this. On the left-hand side is each sub-program, and then on the right-hand column is the maximum grant award amount. So if you're familiar with our previous grant amounts, you'll notice that across the board, pretty much every program funding amount was increased. So we think that this will help fund some larger scale, longer term projects for each sub-program. So under our open submission category, we have the Economic Development and Entrepreneurship Fund. Those are available $1 million, up to $1 million for a single project, or $1.25 million for regional projects. The Construction Ready Water and Sewer Program is eligible for up to $800,000 per project. Regional water and wastewater projects are eligible for up to $2.5 million. Urgent need stays the same for up to $1 million. And all of these are reviewed on a rolling basis from April 1st through the end of the year. So as I talked about a little while ago, the community organizing and what was pre-project planning grant activities are just now being rolled into a planning grant. And the reason behind this was to focus on the ultimate outcomes of a planning grant. We want planning grants, number one, to help a community identify and prioritize the highest community needs and put in place measures to address those community needs. And number two, help a community prepare a competitive application. So if that's housing rehab, the planning grant is going to help get all the ducks in the row to get that housing rehab project in a good spot for a competitive application. I'll pause for a second. Doug, do we have any questions or comments?
We do. We have questions from people named Mark. The first Mark asked, will the planning grant still consist of the letter and simplified application process? So what's the application process look like for the planning grant?
Okay, so yeah, it's the same application process. You'll just submit a letter to us, me and Matt, just explaining what your project idea is, why there's a need for it, and how the need was determined. Once we've received that, then you can submit your application and complete all the initial activities, which is like hiring a consultant or surveying households, whatever that specific planning grant is focused on. The application process will still stay the same. It's just a regular planning grant will hold more eligible activities.
Okay, and the second one's more specific. Will the forgivable loans be with no beneficiary payback, or is it still as it's been with ATP paybacks by homeowners? So we're getting into very specific projects.
That's a good question. I might have to just double check on that, but I'm pretty sure that it's going to be that first option because we are kind of getting away from ATPs as part of competitive applications. But I will definitely double check on that.
But Amanda Healy's giving you a thumbs up.
Okay, cool. So it's the first one.
And then Kenneth Rogers added a comment. In previous years, IPR and Cdbg have had 10 notes. Currently, IPR is 5 years, so there will be different lengths for the liens for the two programs.
So this is Amanda. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So yes, Kenny, right now we are looking at two different lengths of time. You know, it's always easier to go from 10 years down to 5 years than it is to go from 5 years up to 10 years. So we can have some internal conversations about that. There will still be for the length of the loan to ensure proportional payback if the unit is sold or the income eligible household no longer occupies it. So there are still guardrails in place.
And then one more big picture question coming from Patrick County. Can a locality apply for more than one grant?
Yes, we would like to have a conversation before any application is submitted, just to make sure that there's capacity and readiness in place. And we also still have our $2.5 million total Cdbg grant cap per locality in place. So it's possible, but talk to us first.
And Rachel, this is Jay, and that total is with the caveat that we're not including Cdbg COVID-19 related projects, correct?
Correct.
All right, I think you can continue, Rachel.
Cool. Okay, so moving on to our competitive grants. Comprehensive community development, nothing really has changed with that program. The comprehensive community development includes at least 2 activities. It can go up to 3 or more. These activities include housing, water, sewer, streets, drainage, and street improvements. The primary focus on a CCD project is addressing housing needs. And then CCD projects are eligible to receive an additional $250,000 on top of whatever the grant cap currently is for broadband funding. And for broadband, it has to be 10 megabits per second at least. And then the community has to already have identified internet service providers in the area and either have that partnership established or have that partnership ready to be taken on. And broadband has to be focused on unserved areas. So also under competitive, we have Building District Revitalization, or BDR grants. The primary focus of BDR is to alleviate physical and economic blight in commercial and or residential areas that have potential for future economic uses. These BDR grants are eligible for up to $1 million. The criteria is that the project area has to be 25% blighted or at least 50% vacancy rate. A key outcome of a BDR grant is the development of an economic restructuring plan or an economic development strategy. As part of the application, the applicant must provide an analysis of housing and other community needs in that project area. And then design and marketing and advertising activities are eligible under BDR grants. And as far as blight, for BDR grants, this can be either physical blight, where the actual conditions of buildings are deteriorated or vacant, or economic blight, where the buildings are underutilized or vacant and there's potential for redesigning that building for a future economic use. So public infrastructure, this subprogram was previously community facility, and it includes water and wastewater, drainage improvements, and street improvements. Public infrastructure projects are available for up to $1 million. Nothing else about this subprogram changed except that the water connection and sewer connections rates were increased. I believe there were 15,000 for water and 18,000 for sewer. So now they're 20,000 for water and 25,000 for sewer. So those went up. The community service facility subprogram, these grants are eligible for up to $1 million. Multi-purpose community centers are eligible for up to $1.5 million. And multi-purpose community centers can be regional projects as well. And yeah, just in the application, surveys of potential users of the community service facility will help demonstrate the need for this facility in that community. For housing rehab, this grant cap also increased to $1.25 million. The activities under housing rehab can include the actual housing rehab work, substantial rehab, temporary and permanent relocation. As I mentioned, they're administered as a 10-year forgivable loan. This year, we have gotten rid of, well, not gotten rid of, but we're focusing on targeted study areas. There's a typo on that slide. Pet peeve, sorry. Targeted study areas. Instead of scattered site, we found that reviewing those scattered site applications, documentation of specific LMI houses, it was just really difficult on different localities. So instead, we have redefined housing rehab to focus on targeted study areas, and it is up to the applicant to determine the actual project area and draw the boundaries. There's no minimum number of houses that have to be in that project area, and there doesn't have to be a specific design of this project area. We just need in the application a clear map showing the project boundaries and justification or documentation of why that boundary was chosen. It does have to be a well-defined, contiguous area. It can't be just like drawing the shape of my name in the town, or it can still be town-wide. That's still eligible. But yeah, the primary goal of that is to serve a targeted study area to make sure that the LMI houses in that project area are included. And it is clear that the LMI houses are different from the total houses that could be eligible, if that makes sense. And yeah, with the targeted study area, we're no longer requiring that 51% of the houses eligible are included in the study area. So that's going to help you determine the boundary and the number of houses to be served. So public services, this is the sub-program that we started in 2020 that we're continuing into 2021. These are services that meet a community need, a prioritized high community need, and that have a direct impact on the community. These grants are eligible for $250,000 per grant, or up to $1 million for regional projects. Some of these activities include employment, childcare, and health services. In 2020, we did a lot of small business recovery assistance that was more COVID related, but we also did a lot of food security and food bank, food pantry projects, which we want to continue. I'll pause. Doug, are there any questions in the chat box?
No more questions yet.
Cool. Okay. Okay, competitive scoring criteria. This is just the skeletal breakdown of how competitive applications are scored. We have finalized our 2021 competitive application guidelines, which includes a further more detailed like points per section explanation of how applications are scored. So that will be on the website hopefully by the end of the week, but maybe next week. So that'll help you as you are preparing your applications. Just go through those application competitive guidelines, and that'll help you help guide your application.
Rachel, I have to step back in. I didn't have my auto scroll on, but we do have some additional questions.
Okay.
Yeah, so one is, and I think you might have already answered it, are nonprofits eligible to apply for BDR?
Nonprofits, they can definitely have a stake in a BDR project, but the locality where they're located must be the applicant. The nonprofit can work with the locality with an MOU or some kind of understanding in place, and they can do the heavy lifting behind it, but the locality has to be the one to submit the application and receive the funding, which they would then funnel to the nonprofit.
And we're going to stick with BDR for the next question. Must buildings be publicly owned, or can a local government apply for BDR funds on behalf of a private owner with a building in a downtown district?
That's a good question. I'm pretty sure that the locality has to actually own the building, that the work is going to take place. Amanda, do you have a different answer?
So, you know, I'm going to talk if you give me the mic, right?
Great.
So, if all we're talking about is one building, that's going to be a really special kind of situation, and there would need to be some significant preliminary conversations. For our traditional downtown revitalization projects, the ownership of the buildings can remain with individuals. Generally, all that we would assist with is facade work. And again, there would be a deed of trust relationship for that investment.
All right, and then does comprehensive community development include grants for actual new housing construction projects?
No. So housing production is going to fall under community public. Wait. Oh,
It used to be community facilities.
so public infrastructure. Yes.
And then kind of a related question, how about broadband? Does that fall under comprehensive community development?
Yes, it does.
And then a general question, are there any matches required for these grants? Do you need me to repeat that?
Something about match. Sorry.
Yeah, are there any matches required for the CDBG grants?
So not for planning grants or open submission projects, but for competitive applications, yes. In a couple slides, we'll get to leverage and match. But yes, competitive applications, we definitely need award letters. And by award letters, I mean signed, dated, if it's a resolution, with the listed amount committed. So pending leverage, we can't count as match. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that it can't be used, but it just won't count as non-CDBG funds or leverage for the project.
And then one more question. Does the statement, targeted area cannot be revisited for 10 years, mean the defined contiguous project boundary or the area encompassing the 5-mile radius of that defined project area? And that might be a case where you want to look at pretty specifically.
Can Can you repeat the second half of that question?
Yes. So when we're talking about the targeted area cannot be revisited for 10 years. Or does the targeted area mean the defined contiguous project boundary or the area encompassing the 5-mile radius of that defined project area?
So, first, we're kind of getting away from like the 5-mile versus more radius. So the targeted study area, the houses served within that boundary can't be served again within 10 years. If that doesn't make sense, we can get back to that.
Amanda might have something to add.
Yeah, I think Matt Perkins is the one who asked that. I think that if I had to give a definitive answer, I would say, let's talk offline because I want to see the maps that you're looking at.
Thank you, Amanda.
Sure. We love maps.
Yeah. Okay, Rachel, back to you.
Okie doke. All right. So now we're getting into some application mistakes or places that could be better, make applications stronger. But first, so our public hearing requirements, those have stayed the same. They will be Appendix B in our 2021 program design, so that'll be available soon. Basically, you need 2 public hearings. They have to be advertised at least 7 days prior and no less than a week apart. And that documentation has to be attached to your application. So nothing new or exciting really there. Just regular public hearings. As I mentioned earlier, the 2.5 million cap is still in effect. This doesn't include COVID-19 response funding. A transmittal letter must be sent to your PDC if it's an active PDC in your area prior to your application, and that actually has to be uploaded as an attachment with your application. So some of the most common mistakes for costs and commitment, like I said, we do need sufficient documentation of leveraged committed funds. Pending funds can't be counted as leverage, unfortunately. But those signed, dated award letters must be attached with your application in cans. For project-specific readiness and capacity, participation agreements must be signed and in place, also attached with your application. If there are some missing or not signed, we can't count those, and that's gonna really affect your score on the number of houses served. And just have an overall impact on your readiness and capacity. And then capacity also includes your current Cdbg grant management, how many current Cdbg projects are open, and your previous grant management experience. For project needs and outcomes, we've talked a little bit about mapping. But project areas need to be clearly defined, and then documentation of why that boundary was determined. Also with your application, make sure to upload community plans or like community needs assessments, anything that you've done, or even master plans that are up to date, include those with your applications, because we look for how your project aligns with identified community needs. So this is a previous map that was submitted. There are a couple issues here. First of all, there are houses that are colored and numbered that are located outside of the project boundary, so it's not quite clear how many houses are actually in the project boundary. And also with the legend, there was no key or definition to what that legend means. Like, I don't know the difference between OO and IO. So this just wasn't a very clear map. This map, it just kind of hurts my eyes. I don't know about you guys, but there's no attached definition of what the corresponding colors and letters really indicate. So this is just kind of a really messy, hard to read map. This is actually a good example of a map. The project boundary is clear, it's contiguous. There is an attached building inventory which corresponds the numbers into a chart, which includes information on the number of houses listed in order by number in the project area, as well as their physical condition, and if surveys have been sent and or completed to each of those houses in the project area. So this was a good example. Moving on to costs and commitments. So this applicant, it looks like they would have had really good local, state, private, maybe some federal funding for this project, but the award signed, dated, specific amount listed award letters were not included, or they were pending, so we couldn't count any of this outside Cdbg funds, unfortunately, for leverage. And this is just a screenshot of part of our application, probably for this project. Just shows that we couldn't count any non-Cdbg or local money for leverage. And so whatever year review this was, they only received 20 out of 125 points, which is pretty significant and had an impact on their overall score, I'm sure. So that's why leverage is super important in those signed award letters. For housing rehab projects, for me, the biggest mistake I see is that outside of unclear maps is the documentation of the number of houses to be served in that project area. I know in our application we ask in several different places how many individuals to be served, how many LMI individuals to be served, how many houses, how many LMI houses. And so it must be difficult to include the documentation, but we really need like we provide the chart template, and we need that to be as accurate as possible, showing the total number of homes in the area, the total number of homes to be assisted with the project, and then documentation supporting those numbers. If the documentation doesn't match, it's pretty hard to score it, and usually it's we go with the lower number, which means, or however many signed participation agreements are in place is essentially what we go with. And if it doesn't match the total number that you've said, your score is impacted. So we need signed participation agreements, and they have to be up to date. So that's probably the biggest, most common mistake with housing rehab projects. So this is an example from a previous applicant, just the math that whoever reviewed this application had to do. There was a conflicting number of units throughout the application. So just, I know as you get surveys back at different points throughout the process, you might update it in one part of your application and not update it in the other. So just when you're submitting a housing rehab application, just go through the whole thing. I know it probably is really time consuming. But once you get all your surveys, then I would go back and make sure all the numbers match. So this is that template chart that I mentioned, showing the number of homes or units in the project area, how many are LMI, how many are to be served, and then broken down by owner, occupied, renter occupied, and how many are vacant. Yeah, we just look for participation agreements to align with this chart. So BDR, the most common mistake is that demonstration of blight is not clearly defined or documented. Most of the time a map is missing, or there isn't a complete analysis of the economic or physical blight in that area, or the project isn't addressing all the blight that could be done in that community. And then also we look for documentation of support from the business community or the downtown business district, whatever's in that area, their support for the project. So this is our last slide, just going over CAM's submissions, but I just wanted to check, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yeah, Amanda responded to Aisha's question, but I think it's probably worth bringing up. I know there's been a lot of conversation and around projects like this around the Commonwealth. Aisha asked, does the Housing Rehabilitation Grant include adaptive reuse projects, such as converting a motel into housing to address housing needs? And Amanda said that's the kind of question that would be great of a one-on-one conversation with you and Matt. But do you have anything else you want to add around that?
Yeah, I definitely would want to discuss that project further. I think if it's a bigger scale, like a 16,000 square foot building being converted, that might fall into depending on what it really depends on what the end use is. Yeah, if it's in a downtown district, it might be a BDR, because housing is an eligible activity in BDR, or it could be if there's like a shared use kitchen in there, maybe that's an economic development project. So yeah, it could fall into one of several of the sub-programs. So definitely reach out and we can discuss that project further.
Okay. And there's another clarification question. This might have already been asked, but the blighted issue, do blighted buildings need to be owned by the locality, or can they be privately owned to be counted as blighted and contributing toward the need in that district or the project area?
I believe they can be privately owned, but I'll double check about that specific question.
Okay, and then the next question, what length of time is considered current for participation agreements?
Within the last year.
And I think we're caught up on the questions.
Great. Okay, just jotting down that question. Okay. All right, so getting to the actual CAMS submission instructions. Like I said, the locality has to be the applicant. Most of you guys already have your profile organizations set up in CAMS. You don't really need to do anything unless you need to update your audit or annual financial statement. That does have to be updated prior to submission of your application. And yeah, CAMS is available on our website. If you just go to DHCD and search CAMS, it'll pop up. Also, sometimes if a helpful hint with CAMS, if you leave it open on a tab for too long with no activity, it may not save your information. So just, if you're not, save often. That's a very helpful hint. But if you're not working on it actively, I would go ahead and save and then close and come back to your application. And if it doesn't work in one web browser like Chrome, sometimes it doesn't work in Chrome. So I'll go in Internet Explorer and have no problems. So that also might be an option, or just click refresh if something isn't saving. So yeah, that is pretty much it for everything. For CAMS, our overall program. In case you missed it in the beginning, I'll just say our 2021 program design, as well as our fact sheets and competitive application guidelines, are all updated and will be available on the website either by the end of this week or next week. So be on the lookout for that. If you have any questions in the meantime, just email me or Matt. My email address is Rachel, RACHEL.Jordan, JORDAN, @dhcd.virginia.gov. And then Matt's is matt.weaver@dhcd.virginia.gov. And that's it for now.
We've got a couple of additional questions that came in. One is on financial statements. When we say financial statements, is that a calendar year or a fiscal year? That's one question.
Financial statements. I believe it's fiscal year.
And then the other is on match. In the past, several projects I've worked on, this is from Catherine Vanoy. In the past, several projects I've worked on have been able to cite ARC area development as leverage. But we know the selection timing on ARC won't be announced until after the 4/1 deadline for CDBG, typically. Is this a new level of rigor with pending versus committed match? So when folks are putting together that application, how does that, how should they include ARC if it's pending, even though they don't quite know yet?
Yeah, it definitely would not hurt to include it, even if it's pending. We also are part of, Matt and I are part of the ARC development process, so it's helpful for us to see it as well. Committed ARC funds obviously would really help your application, but pending ones, even if we can't count it as non-CDBG leverage, it still would not hurt your application. So I would include it if possible.
Hey, Rachel, this is Amanda. I'd like to put in a plug for planning grants, particularly if you're approaching a project that is not kind of standard. You know, on our traditional water and sewer construction projects, they're pretty standard. But housing rehabs always have unique characteristics. Downtown projects always have unique characteristics. And those things can be identified and managed through the planning grant process. Particularly the downtown projects, although we look at it as elimination of slums and blight, and that sounds like it's all physical, we don't see it that way. We see elimination of slums and blight as having a real economic restructuring component. We will expect that there is some well thought out and targeted investment to, in fact, revitalize the area. It's also important to note that when we talk about rehabilitating storefronts, we're just talking about the store. Downtown projects, we generally do not go inside the building to do rehabilitation. And it's really important that people understand that that's all we do. So if somebody wants to open a business in this storefront and the inside is a hot mess, they're going to have to be able to address that themselves or with other types of funding, because our funding is just for the streetscape, if you will. So again, the planning grants are a really good way to start that process. Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And there was another question about the planning grant process, so maybe it's worth just running through that again. And the question was, did it change at all from last year? And I know you touched on that, but let's reemphasize that.
Yeah, so the planning grant actual process has not changed at all, really, since 2020 or previous years. We're just rolling all the previously what was known as pre-project planning grant activities into a regular planning grant. Our planning grants are still available for each category of community improvement project that we have. So housing rehab or BDR or broadband, those are still all eligible project planning grants that you can apply for. We just want conversation with you if you're interested in pursuing a planning grant before you apply, just to make sure that you have your ultimate end goal in mind or some kind of community project outcome envisioned, even if you don't have the specifics. The planning grant is what would help you get those specifics, but we want to make sure that you're in a good place to submit your application for a planning grant.
Yeah, now if I can chime in, this is Jay Grant again. It seems like some of the questions are kind of alluding to, why we've changed the timeline a little bit. And I think we're trying to be a little bit more proactive, get things done a little bit earlier, because we know it takes a little bit of time for the governor's announcement to come out. And so if we can start our process earlier, wrap the process up earlier, hopefully we'll be able to get these grants out at a time that's more acceptable to you all, middle of the year or earlier than that. And on that note, I always like to say that this is a grassroots process. So CDBG is always about your community, and so we really appreciate your input. And Rachel, great job, and Doug and Amanda, I appreciate everyone participating in this session today for the How to Apply. But as you all know, we've had input sessions and other opportunities, and really you have the opportunity throughout the year. Contact Rachel, contact Matt, or any of your other representatives, and we're happy to answer questions. And since Amanda gave a plug, I want to do a quick plug as well. We have our DHCD's Creating Community Vitality series, and I'm going to hit enter right here and put this in the chat. So if you all have not taken a look at that, this is a monthly series where we're showcasing speakers both from Virginia and from outside of Virginia, really over the course of the whole year. And it's going to be a really broad series covering a wide range of topics, everything from, I think next month in February, we're talking about placemaking, to infrastructure. We're going to talk about a whole lot of different things that I think will be helpful as we're all coming at this from different angles. And not to mention, or I should say last but not least, we have our grants management workshop coming up next week. Amanda, do you want to say something about that since I see you clapping?
Sure. So as many of you know, we have forever had an annual grants management workshop. Of course, this year it is virtual. We had initially planned to have it in conjunction with the Governor's Housing Conference. Because of that being virtual, we decided to go on and split it up. I do not have handy, maybe Joe or Joanne can put into the chat box the information about registering for that. We are filling up, but it is open to folks who have current projects or want to have current projects. We are organizing the agenda so that you can drop in for what works for you, what you need to know, but you have some flexibility. So you're not going to miss something by participating in another one. But we are looking forward to having strong participation and making sure that everybody has the tools that they need to conduct their project in a successful manner. Thanks, Stuart.
And maybe, Amanda, someone can reach out to Karen Downing. She's saying she did not receive a registration.
Ah, good to know. Yes, somebody from our office will follow up with you either today or tomorrow, Karen.
Doug, any other questions for Rachel?
Sorry, there's one from the town of Jarrett, but I think it's probably one that we should reach out and have a conversation with, a pretty specific one.
Oh, I see it now. Yeah, the drainage issues in the town. Yeah, well, I'll definitely reach out to them and contact at Town of Jarrett, and we'll talk about that project further.
And we've recorded this, and of course the PowerPoint presentation will be available as will the recording.
All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining. Again, feel free to email me with any other questions that you have after this presentation. And be on the lookout for our 2021 program design and our fact sheets on the website. Those will be available soon. All right. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you.